Picture the scene. It is a cold morning in February 1587 in the small German town of Nordlingen. A woman named Rebecca Lamp is dragged from a stone cell where she has been chained for weeks. Her hair is matted. Her fingers are broken from the thumbscrews. She has not slept in days because her jailers have kept her awake through a technique the interrogators call tortura insomnia. In her pocket, hidden against her skin, is a letter she managed to write to her husband and 6 children. It reads, "I'm innocent, so help me God. Not one of the things of which they accuse me is true." 2 months later, Rebecca will be burned alive at the stake, along with 31 other women from the same town. Her letter still survives in the German archives, preserved in careful ink, a voice reaching across 4 centuries to insist on a truth no one would hear. This was the reality of the European witch hunts. Not a medieval superstition, as most people believe, but a systematic, bureaucratic, legally organized machine of death that killed tens of thousands of people, most of them women, most of them innocent, and most of them tortured into confessing things that never happened. And what the historical record reveals is far darker than the Halloween version you were taught. Let's uncover the dark truth. Before we go further, we need to shatter the single biggest misconception about this entire history. When most people hear the phrase medieval witch hunts, they picture torches and pitchforks in some vague dark age, peasants dragging old women to burn. That image is almost entirely wrong. The great European witch hunts did not happen during the Middle Ages at all. They exploded during the early modern period, roughly between 1450 and 1750, with the worst decades falling between 1560 and 1630. That means the witch trials happened at the same time as the scientific revolution. The same century that gave us Galileo, Kepler, and the invention of the telescope also gave us the systematic burning of women accused of flying through the air on broomsticks. Historians now estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe and colonial America during this period, based on decades of archival research by scholars like Wolfgang Behringer and Brian Levack. Roughly 75 to 85% of those executed were women. And the geography matters. The killing was not evenly spread. The Holy Roman Empire, particularly the German-speaking territories, accounted for nearly half of all executions. France, Switzerland, Scotland, and parts of Scandinavia followed. Meanwhile, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, despite the fearsome reputation of the Inquisition, executed relatively few witches because their inquisitorial courts demanded stricter evidence. That single fact reframes everything. The witch hunts were not driven by ignorant peasants. They were driven by educated judges, university-trained theologians, and printed books. The horror was not superstition escaping the leash of civilization. The horror was civilization itself, doing what it believed was right. Let's begin with the book that lit the fire. In 1486, a Dominican friar named Heinrich Kramer published a manual called the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to the Hammer of Witches. Kramer had recently been humiliated in the Austrian town of Innsbruck, where a local bishop threw him out of a witch trial for asking obscene, obsessive questions of the accused women. Furious and disgraced, Kramer retreated to Cologne and wrote a book that would become one of the deadliest documents in European history. The Malleus was a step-by-step guide. How to identify a witch. How to interrogate her. How to torture her. How to break her defenses. How to secure a conviction. Kramer argued that women were spiritually weaker than men, more prone to lust, and therefore more likely to sign pacts with the devil. He wrote, and this line still chills modern readers, that all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which in women is insatiable. That single sentence, printed in Latin, would be quoted in courtroom for the next 200 years. The book might have gathered dust like countless other medieval treatises. But in 1450, Johannes Gutenberg had perfected the printing press. By 1500, the Malleus had gone through 14 editions. By 1600, nearly 30. It spread through Europe with a speed no earlier text could have matched. Picture a small-town magistrate in Bavaria, sitting by candlelight, reading this book for the first time. He now believes he holds a scientific instrument for detecting evil. He now believes any strange event in his village, a dead cow, a stillborn child, a hailstorm, points to a witch hiding in plain sight. And he now believes torture is not only permitted but required. The printing press did not just spread the Renaissance. It industrialized paranoia. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The actual mechanics of a witch trial were designed, from beginning to end, to make acquittal nearly impossible. Once you were accused, the legal system became a closed loop of destruction. Consider the case of Anna Pappenheimer, a beggar woman arrested in Bavaria in 1600 along with her husband and 3 sons. The Pappenheimer family had committed no crime except being poor and moving through towns as vagrants. Under torture that historian Wolfgang Behringer has documented in horrifying detail, Anna confessed to murdering hundreds of children, flying to witches' sabbaths, and having intercourse with demons. On July 29, 1600, she was executed in Munich in front of a crowd estimated at thousands. Her 10-year-old son Hansel was forced to watch his entire family die. He was executed himself several months later. The trial records still exist. Historians who have read them describe a pattern repeated across thousands of cases. First, the suspect was arrested on rumor or gossip alone. Then came the interrogation, without a lawyer, without witnesses for the defense. If the accused denied guilt, torture was applied, and confessions extracted under torture were treated as legally valid in most jurisdictions. Refusing to confess was itself considered evidence of witchcraft, since the devil was believed to be giving the accused supernatural strength. Confessing meant execution. Refusing to confess meant more torture until you confessed than execution. There was quite literally no path out. The power line of the witch hunts is this. In a system designed to find witches, everyone becomes a witch. And once the machine started turning, it did not stop easily. Brace yourself, because the next detail transforms this history from tragedy to something almost incomprehensible. The witch hunts were not driven only by fear or theology. They were also, in many places, a business. Legal codes across the Holy Roman Empire allowed the property of convicted witches to be seized and divided. A share went to the local ruler. A share went to the court. A share went to the executioner, the jailer, and the interrogator. The system paid people to find witches. In the Prince-Bishopric of Würzburg between 1626 and 1631, Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg executed at least 900 people, including his own nephew, 19 Catholic priests, and children as young as 7. Contemporary letters describe the town as gripped by a fever no one could stop. Once the machinery of confiscation started running, judges had every financial incentive to keep finding new suspects. Neighboring town of Bamberg, under Prince Bishop Johann Georg II Fuchs von Dornheim, executed roughly 1,000 more people in the same decade. Dornheim even built a purpose-designed prison called the Drudenhaus, or Witch House, complete with a chapel where the condemned were forced to hear a final sermon before their deaths. The most haunting document from this period is a letter written by Johannes Junius, the mayor of Bamberg himself, arrested in 1628. Smuggled to his daughter Veronica from his prison cell, the letter reads, "Innocent the first have come into prison. Innocent the first have been tortured. Innocent must I die." He describes being suspended by his arms until they dislocated, having his fingers crushed, and finally naming random citizens under torture because he could no longer endure the pain. He begs his daughter's forgiveness. He tells her the entire accusation is false. Weeks later, he was burned at the stake. The letter survived because Veronica hid it. It is now one of the most powerful primary sources we have about how the innocent were destroyed. When mayors of cities could be dragged into this system, no one was safe. Now let's step into a question historians have wrestled with for generations. Why women? Why did roughly 8 out of 10 victims share the same gender? The answer is neither simple nor comfortable. Part of it was theological. The Malleus Maleficarum had established, in printed authority, that women were spiritually inferior and sexually vulnerable to Satan. Part of it was economic. Widows, single women, and elderly women without male protectors were the least defended members of European society. They often held small pieces of property, small inheritances, small savings, which made them convenient targets for confiscation. Part of it was social. Midwives, healers, and women who knew about herbs and childbirth held forms of knowledge that made powerful men uneasy. When a baby died in childbirth, and in the 17th century babies died constantly, the midwife was often the first suspect. Consider the case of Valperga Hosmanen, an elderly midwife executed in Dillingen, Bavaria, in 1587. Under torture, she confessed to killing more than 40 infants over decades of practice. The reality is almost certainly that she had attended 40 births where the child died, which was tragically ordinary in an era of high infant mortality. Her execution warrant, which still survives, describes her being torn with red-hot pincers, her hands cut off, and finally burned at the stake. Her real crime was being an old woman who knew things men could not verify. Picture standing in a village square in 1590 and looking at who is at risk. The woman who lives alone at the edge of the forest. The healer who cured your neighbor's fever with a strange tea. The widow who inherited her husband's small orchard. The old midwife whose hands trembled at the last birth. Any of them could be denounced tomorrow. Any of them could be dead within a month. That constant vulnerability, the knowledge that female independence itself could get you killed, shaped how women lived and behaved for 2 centuries. Here's a detail that transforms our understanding of this history entirely. The witch hunts did not end because people stopped believing in witches. They ended because the educated classes stopped believing in the legal system that hunted them. Throughout the 17th century, a small number of extraordinarily brave voices began to speak out. The most important was Friedrich Spee, a German Jesuit priest who served as confessor to condemned witches in Würzburg during the worst years of the killings. Spee walked hundreds of women to the stake and heard their final words. Every single one of them, he later wrote, was innocent. In 1631, he anonymously published a book called Cautio Criminalis, or a warning on criminal justice. In it, he argued that torture produced only false confessions, that the entire legal system had been corrupted, and that the fires of the executioners were consuming innocent souls by the thousand. He wrote, "Torture fills our Germany with witches and unheard-of wickedness, and not only Germany, but any nation that attempts it." Spee's book, along with the earlier work of the Dutch physician Johann Weyer and the growing rationalism of thinkers like René Descartes, slowly poisoned the intellectual credibility of witch trials. By 1682, France under Louis XIV had effectively banned witch executions. By 1736, England had repealed its Witchcraft Act. The last legal execution for witchcraft in Europe took place in Switzerland in 1782, when a servant girl named Anna Goldie was beheaded in the canton of Glarus. She was formally exonerated by the Swiss government in 2008, 226 years after her death. That is the profound and disturbing truth of how these persecutions ended. Not through some sudden enlightenment. Not because ordinary people rose up, but because judges, lawyers, and priests, one by one, began to admit that the entire apparatus had been machinery for killing the innocent. The witch hunts died the same way they lived, through the slow decisions of educated men in rooms far from the stake. Step back now and ask the deeper question. What does this history actually teach us? Because the witch hunts are not simply a story about backwardness. They are a story about how sophisticated, literate, self-consciously modern societies can construct elaborate systems for destroying innocent people, and can do so while genuinely believing they are protecting the community. Every element that made the witch hunts possible still exists in human societies today. The need for scapegoats when things go wrong. The willingness to trust confessions extracted under pressure. The tendency to target the vulnerable, the outsider, the woman who does not conform. The bureaucratic mindset that separates the person who signs the warrant from the person who lights the fire. The financial incentives that quietly corrupt the search for truth. The great historian of the witch hunts, Norman Cohn, once observed that the persecutions revealed a fundamental capacity in human beings. We can construct from thin air an entire imaginary enemy, populate it with faces of real people, and then destroy those people with the full endorsement of law, religion, and community. The witches did not exist, but the victims were absolutely real. The bones under the German plazas are absolutely real. Rebecca Lemp's letter is absolutely real. The lesson buried in these fires is that the greatest danger to human beings is rarely the monster we imagine. It is the certainty with which we hunt monsters that were never there to begin with. So let's gather everything we've uncovered. A printing press that industrialized paranoia. A legal system rigged to make acquittal impossible. A financial machine that profited from destruction. Women targeted because they were vulnerable, independent, or simply old. Brave voices like Friedrich Spee who risked everything to speak the truth. And 40,000 or more human beings, most of them innocent, burned, or hanged in the name of protecting society from a threat that never existed. The deepest lesson here is that evil rarely looks like evil to the people committing it. The men who condemned Rebecca Lemp and Johannes Junius and Anna Goldie believed they were defending Christian civilization. They believed they were following the law. They believed they were the good ones. That is the most terrifying inheritance the witch hunts left us, the knowledge that ordinary certainty, in the wrong hands, can burn cities to the ground. In our own century, when we see mass panics rise online, when whole groups get accused of hidden conspiracies, when we feel the urge to trust an accusation because it fits what we already fear, the ghosts of the witch trials are whispering to us. Listen to them. They know things we forget at our peril. If this story moved you, if you want to keep uncovering the buried truths behind the myths of European history, subscribe to Medieval Secrets Unlocked. Every week, we bring you the verified history that textbooks flatten and Hollywood distorts. And in the comments below, I want to hear your answer to this. If you had lived in a German town in 1590 and your neighbor was accused of witchcraft, would you have stayed silent to protect your family, or spoken up knowing it might cost you everything? There's no easy answer, but the answer you give reveals something about you. Until next time, never forget, the fires we light to protect ourselves are often the ones that burn our own children. The events described in this video are drawn from surviving trial records, personal letters, and decades of scholarly research.